Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam Nasser, and this is the Azure Cleveland User Group. A little bit about the group. We meet every second Wednesday of the month. The meetings are free of charge and open to the public, and we cover a variety of topics related to Azure, whether it's infrastructure as a service, or platform as a service, or software as a service. You can find meeting information posted on meetup.com at the link listed at the bottom of the slide. We always like to give a big thank you to our sponsors, PostSharp and DevExpress, for sponsoring the post-meeting prizes, which will be given away using the eval form. And we'd like to thank the .NET Foundation for sponsoring the Meetup site. And last but not least, NIS Technologies for sponsoring the virtual meeting space. We also like to thank Manning.com for a 35% off offer on a selection of books at the link listed at the bottom of the slide. The link, as well as the discount code, will be made available in chat shortly after the presentation. Some general information. Please keep in mind that participation is encouraged, and the only stupid question is the one not being asked. However, when not speaking, kindly ask you to mute your microphones just to avoid any background noise. And we want to keep it casual but organized, so feel free to jump in at any point in time with questions or comments, whether verbally or through the chat window. But at the same time, we want to give our presenter enough time to go through the slides and the demos. And last but not least, the presentation is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube in just a few short days. So with that said, let's jump into our feature presentation. Tonight we have ARM versus Bicep deploying via GitHub Actions, presented by Alec Harrison. Alec is a Microsoft MVP. He's also the leader of the Iowa Microsoft Azure User Group. And he is an enthusiast with test-driven development, as well as cloud technologies and agile methodologies. And so with that, let's welcome Alec. Alec, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out. Welcome, everybody. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a consultant at Lean Techniques. We're a software consultancy shop, so we kind of do some IT transformations. I think they call it digital transformations. I do more of the custom app dev space, so come to us with a problem. We'll help you build it, either building it with you or helping put together a team to help you build it and deliver it, and then hand it over for run and maintain, or we can help you with that. I'm an Azure nerd, Microsoft MVP. Brian Gorman, who I think you guys have had before, and I started a podcast and Azure Cloud Workshops. So there used to be Microsoft Cloud Workshops. They've since made a lot of those private. So our goal was to modernize some of those and make them open source and open to the public so that we could keep them alive and keep them going. Co-organizer of the Iowa Microsoft Azure User Group. We're doing a talk in January over generative AI. We're having a little bit of an AI workshop and having Scott Hanselman talk virtually at the end. So you can find us on Meetup if you want to join and listen in. Right now it's one meeting. I think we're going to end up splitting it out. So if you just want to listen to the Hanselman piece, I believe it's 6 p.m. Central, so it'd be 7 p.m. Eastern time. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out to me. That's my contact information, or you can find me on LinkedIn. So this talk kind of came together during COVID. I think we've all kind of been in that place of being in a closed space, you know, the world changing. And it's actually kind of interesting. So who here has heard of Bicep before? Kind of hard to see. I guess we don't really have interactions in, maybe we do. We have chat. Cool. Or ARM, that's the other one. Yep, infrastructure as code. Does anybody think we're talking about anatomy here? Just trying to judge where we are in terms of a group. So when this talk got synthesized, I was sitting, I used to be, you'll notice that I help run the Iowa Microsoft Azure User Group in Kansas City, and I live in Nebraska of all places. Well, I used to live in Iowa, and my wife and I moved to Omaha to be closer to family. We were in a tiny little apartment. I think we had our two 60-pound dogs, one-bedroom apartment on the second floor. And I was giving one of these talks over lunch one day while she was off. And she's like, Alec, can I give you some feedback? Your talk was really boring. So the synthesis of this was to how to not do that. She's like, as a educator, she was a kindergarten teacher at the time. She's like, my job is to be entertaining to little children all day. And I can tell you that talk, most of the people you were talking to were probably completely zoned out. So she's like, I got some tricks here, kind of keep it lively, keep it up, and keep people engaged. So it's like have some audience engagement. Had that with the question. Said to have some cooler text. If you know, you know. Shout out Comic Sans. Have some more GIFs. Keep people engaged. Have some pictures. If you work with me at all, this one gets thrown around a lot. Old man yelling at cloud. And then voice inflections. If you ever want to get into speaking publicly, this is one of my favorite TED Talks ever. It's Will Steffen's How to Sound Smart in Your TEDx Talk. It is, I think, a 10 to 15 minute talk about him talking about nothing other than sounding important. So it's actually really funny, but it really drives home the point of how to talk better in public and how to basically sound interesting and not just drone on, be boring, in lack of a better word, just be a better speaker. And there's a lot of tips in there. It is satire and humor, but there is some education to be done there too. So we got all that. We're done, right? We can wipe our hands clean. Thanks for having me. Well, let's go ahead and jump into what we all came here for. The infrastructure as code, ARM versus Bicep. So just to lay a little bit of groundwork, I believe most people in the chat have heard of one or the other. So I'm going to assume that you know about infrastructure as code, but in case you haven't, to make sure we're all starting at the same place, the reason why you'd want to use it at all is to reduce your management overhead. So that can be stuff that you don't have to go out there in the portal and manage manually, right? Click around, do manual tweaking. You can also put validators, so like template, test toolkit, or PS rule. You can have their run every time so that you know, hey, is my pipeline potentially going to work? Am I going to have custom rules to my organization that I'm going to validate by deploying? How do I make sure that I follow the rules that I have in place? You have self-documenting infrastructure a little bit. I don't know if you've ever went to the Azure portal. Maybe this has even happened to you professionally where you get an application, no documentation whatever other than here's the Azure login, have fun. You might have to go through then and figure out, okay, let me work backwards. Let me export. Azure does have a cool exporting your template with some boilerplate in there. So you can try to figure out what's all there, but you truly don't know exactly what is there, right? Or if somebody tells you, hey, this is an app service with these specs, you more or less have to take their word for it if it's just written down. Whereas if you're using infrastructure as code and pipelines, theoretically, unless they changed it just then, your pipeline should always have, and your code should always have the most up-to-date value and document itself of what kind of configuration it is. You should be able to easily redeploy it. So I don't know if you've ever built out an environment in a lower environment, finally get over the hump of something was wrong and weird and messed up, and then come back a month or two later and like, that's great, now we need another one. You're like, okay, let me go back and relive the pain of getting everything stood up again. With infrastructure as code, you should theoretically not have to do that because once you get over that, you just JSON substitute or substitute your values, replace the values of, say, dev for test, and then boom, you should have an identical-ish configuration just with different names. And then faster speed and consistency and code reuse. So again, once you've done it once, you should be able to do it again. There's also tools like modules and whatnot to have shared modules. If you want to, for say, build out a SQL server and there's like security guidance of your organization, you can do that in both ARM and Bicep, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you want your next SQL server for the next project, and you don't have to go back to like the single guy who maybe knows how to configure all that. You can instead get that shared throughout your organization. So just a quick question here. To compare and contrast the two things we have, if you want to put it in chat, we have two different objects here, some similarities and some differences. Or you can come off mute if you want to shout it out too. Give everybody a couple seconds here. Both have wheels. That's a good one. Both have doors. Both some words of travel, size. Both
One
are
of them is
expensive.
slow at startup, the other is much quicker.
Yeah. Actually, Rick, you're the first person I've given this to, and I've done it a couple times that actually got it first try. They both have Rolls-Royce engines. One doesn't fly very well. Yes, that is true. And how does this relate to ARM versus Bicep? I think, so ARM came out before Bicep, and I think while both of these have similar use cases of traveling you and potentially multiple individuals, there's different use cases that are going to be better suited to others. And if your goal is to get long distances quickly, right, there's always going to be probably one that you're going to favor. One, the first thing we designed as humans was a car to get us from to and from. And then it was like, well, what's the next thing we can build on top of the car to be better? Then came the plane. So I kind of look at this as the same as ARM and Bicep. The car was first built. It, for all intensive purposes, does a job really well. But then you have the plane, which potentially, depending on your use case, works even better. So I kind of look at that the same with ARM and Bicep. Of ARM came out, there were some things that maybe could be better, and then Bicep built on top of that and kind of made it simpler for everybody to use. The other thing that we have, this is from Microsoft Learn. I stole this. You kind of have the pros and cons of each, and where some don't really matter. Readability, I think, is a core pro for Bicep. ARM, not so much. It's typically very wide and very long. Maintainability, I mean, once you do get your ARM template, it's there. It's not terrible to maintain. Bicep tends to be a little better, and we'll talk about why that is when we get to the actual autocompletes and whatnot. JSON, which, depending on who you are, maybe a pro, maybe a con. That's what ARM is. Bicep is not in JSON. Unique language. This one is given to ARM because ARM is just raw JSON. If you know how to write a JSON file, you can write ARM theoretically, whereas Bicep is a specific language just for Bicep. So you'd be learning something in addition to your normal workflow. I think after we show it, I make the argument a little bit that that's worth it and that's fine, but we'll dig into that a little more. And linter support, because ARM is JSON, there is not native linter support, where Bicep does have that. So we'll jump into an ARM example here to just show off kind of what that looks like in case you haven't seen one before. So if we look here, this is a simple application. I believe it's an app service that is also having a function app. So very simple deployment. We're going to have our app service plan. We'll have our app service. We'll have a GitHub repo that we're going to be using for the code. And one thing I think you notice right off the bat is, one, everything here gets very wide. Some of these things and these variables and methods, you're calling a method within a method, calling your environment, and we're at 162 lines. If I just handed you this, you could probably figure out how to work in it, right? It's not the worst thing in the world. It could be, we have some parameters, we have some variables. It's not terrible, right? Like, you could get by with this. So we'll jump back to the PowerPoint real quick. In the kind of key points here are, it's basic, right? Like, it's JSON. There's not a whole lot of bells and whistles. We saw a little bit of functions going on there. That's cool. We saw it's in JSON, which again, some people are very opposed to JSON. I feel like those are less and less people nowadays, but and it's computer language. So it's written in such a way, not necessarily to be human readable, it's written to be computer processable. Take JSON over YAML. It depends on the day, but yeah. I tend to see less bad JSON. Maybe that's a good way of putting it. So the drawbacks of ARM, it's long, it's wide, it's JSON, so it can be a pro or a con depending on who you are, and it's not really human readable. One thing with JSON too is it's a little bit harder if you do some crazy stuff to need to document. Since it doesn't technically support comments, you can figure out a way to put comments in, but I have seen some things in here where people like start doing for loops, or they start, getting some really complex functions. This is just concatenating the start with a variable and grabbing a few other values. You can get these really crazy, and I've seen those. It'd be nice if you could just put a comment in and just say, hey, this is what this is doing and this is why we need it. So we'll jump to Bicep. The big things to point out is we'll have linter support, we'll have snippet suggestion, we can validate it in an IDE, and it is the future of where Microsoft is going. They seem to be investing a lot of time and effort into this. It is only for Azure, so it's a first-party support because it's built by Microsoft too. You should always have the bleeding edge things that work right out of the box, whereas maybe you won't in other apps. So we'll go ahead and look at here. So this is the same exact example. We have some secure strings here. We want to do that, but we have our parameters. You'll notice it's more of a declarative style. So it's more similar to maybe like a JavaScript kind of framework where you have your parameter. The difference between parameters and variables are parameters are values that you can change at runtime. So this one in particular is we can pass in and override it, but it does have a default value for all of these. This is our secure. If we want to do that, we can do variables. And you'll notice, for example, when we're combining variables, you can just use plain string interpolation, which if we go back to the same thing here, this was specifically the app service plan name. Right here, we do have to call an extra function, and it just makes it a little longer and a little more complicated. And one thing that is the bane of your existence if you've ever done infrastructure as code is trying to figure out which APIs are even supported anymore. And by that, I mean this section right here. So if I want to get a storage account, what I would have to do typically in ARM is, okay, I'm going to create this storage account one. I'm going to have to copy and paste this over because I don't know what APIs are supported. Because say it's been a while, or Microsoft doesn't use the same API versions for everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to need to know what storage account to use, right? Because that API is not going to be the same across. I don't know. It's just I want this one. It's always changing. They're always different. And here we go. So in the past, I would have had to Google something just to figure out which API version it is. It says latest, hit the drop down. Okay, we're at 22.09.01. So one thing you can do with Bicep, which is really cool, is it's declare a resource. We're going to do a storage account. This is GitHub Copilot X. So if you see this auto completion like this, that is a little bit misleading. But one thing, this right here is the Bicep linter. So as I start typing, we can see storage accounts tab, and then it'll actually show me a list of all the valid ones that I can pick, which is really cool. That saves you potentially from having to bounce back and forth between Google and this. If you know exactly what resources you want to make and wire them together, you can just keep hopping from one to the other without having to go, for example, like the server farm is not on the same API cadence necessarily as the storage account. So there is a potential here that I'd have to bounce back and forth between each resource, bouncing out to Google. What API version are we in? Going back, and this helps cut down on that and helps more developer productivity. And then you have Copilot where you can just cheat altogether and autocomplete files. So the other thing we'll see is we can also do some commenting. So you can have more of your traditional commenting here. One thing that is cool, if we start dumping some of this stuff, you'll notice that before we even deploy it, which you would have to do typically in ARM, it'll tell us, oh, this is missing the following things, and these are going to be required. If it's an inaccuracy, report it to the Bicep team. So prior to deployment time, we can tell what is valid Bicep, what isn't, and try to go from there. So we're hopefully not, building something, deploying it just to see it fail eventually, and then having to come back here. It should reduce the time it takes us to iterate. I will say I have seen some slight issues in the Bicep linter. One specifically was when Azure Container Apps came out. I believe a quarter gig, is it a quarter megabyte or a quarter gig? Anyway, the value was like 0.25, and it said the smallest value was 1. It was expecting an integer. And that is something when they first came out, I had to report a bug, but they fixed it relatively quickly. Oh, excuse me. A lot of these normal, like more well-used apps are going to be obviously more solid, and you're going to have less of those issues. It's just more if you start getting on the bleeding cutting edge of things that the documentation needs to catch up. We can do single line comments and multi-line comments. We can also directly reference other apps components, so other resources, what depends on. And we also have the linter support that says that this isn't necessary because you specify the server farm ID up here, so it just intuitively knows, hey, because I need this to specify it, I'm inherently dependent on it. So, and then also did a multi-line comment just to show these are available. So if you do some crazy shenanigans, you can always put it there. Again, this is the same app. One thing that it does help do, which is really cool, some of these values used to be required by ARM to deploy your Azure function, and you didn't really know why until you went to deploy it, where Bicep is starting to take some of these things that maybe aren't necessarily required or needed and starting to hide it from the end user. So the thing that's cool about that is if it's not something you need to worry about, they'll abstract it away from you, and then they handle the part of transpiling your Bicep back down to ARM so that then it can have the computer language behind it so the computer knows what you're trying to do. That was a lot. Do we have any questions? If not, we can keep going. But
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So does that mean all of Bicep is eventually transpiled into ARM?
That is correct.
Okay.
And that is a pro in my opinion, just because I've been at organizations that once they get cemented in something, it's hard to change. So you can always turn ARM into Bicep, and it's a little harder to go from ARM to Bicep, but it's really easy to go from Bicep to ARM. So if you're going to an organization that is really established in ARM, you can basically make the argument of, well, why don't we try Bicep? If you hate it, we can just run a CLI command and turn our Bicep into ARM. And then you still are with the same thing at the end of the day.
And are there tools to go from ARM to Bicep?
Yes, I believe I call one out here. Let me see. I think it's right here. I'll go ahead. I'll make sure I come back to that if I don't. I think I have it a little bit later on.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So the reason we want to do this is we get our linter support, we get our snippet suggestions, we validate it in an IDE. Again, Microsoft seems to be working on that. I believe, and anybody can look at this, if you go to GitHub Bicep, one drawback of Bicep is I think they're still not technically V1. And this was true as I wrote it. Yeah, so they're at version 0.23, which is the latest as of November 1st. I always go back and look because I first wrote this line in 2021. So just kind of an idea. They're still working on stuff. It is fairly stable, but just know that it's not technically V1 yet. The other thing is, as you saw, it is a domain-specific language, so that is a drawback of potentially something extra you'll have to learn, assuming if you already know like JSON. We'll go ahead and pop out here. So if you want to get more side-by-side examples, we'll see if this website wants to cooperate. I don't think this is the one. No. There's some more side-by-side, and there's the Bicep Playground, which is fun. Let's see if this is the one that's a little bit slow, but it lets you look at stuff side-by-side. We can see different expressions here. So for example, we saw some parameters. We can see how Bicep is a little bit cleaner than JSON. Strings, logical operators, deployment scopes, all that sort of fun stuff. And I believe let's go past it. There is I can find the link. So that's a list of all the left and right kind of things. If you look here, this is just a sample empty Bicep and ARM template. So just to have the bare minimum, this is what you need in ARM, this is what you need in Bicep. And then they have a bunch of sample applications here. So the container app with Dapper, just a main container app. There's all of these. We can just pick one by random. I like the container app one. Container app create. And what this will do is it'll show side by side an example one. So this is a Bicep template. We're at 119 lines. If we look, ARM is at 187. And if you were picking one to work on, I don't know about you, but personally, I think the left one looks a little less scary just because I got some more colors, I got some more linter, and it just looks a little bit more approachable. Some of these also, if you really want to, could get removed. There's just descriptions. So if you're trying to deploy this via the CLI, it'll tell you what each parameter is used for. And then you can also in Bicep put allowed parameters. So I think, and you can do that in ARM here as well. But what that does is it allows you to not put in basically an invalid parameter that would break your deployment while still giving your users the flexibility to do whatever they want. So this is a good example if you, for example, want to do a shared module or a linked, and they talk about it down here. Modules are linked templates. So back to our SQL example, if I want to dictate as an organization, here's the kind of layout we're going to use for SQL. I can do that, potentially let them have, more options for, I know that's a little bit small for like RAM or CPU or whatnot, but think about it like you could have different categories, and then you could even outlaw some. So for example, if you don't want somebody to have like a P1 app service instance, you can only have the allowed parameters B1 through S, and you can specify all those. And if somebody tries to deploy a P1, you just throw an exception and just say that's not allowed, and it'll blow up when they try to deploy their template. That was that. I think lessons learned, it is a revolving door. We'll go ahead and I think we'll jump to here. This is what I thought I had. And then we'll talk about, I can show you an example of deploying a static site as well. So Sam, this is what you were asking about, is decompiling ARM template to JSON or from JSON to Bicep. This is where I tell people it's not a fixed one way or the other. It's a revolving door. So if you want to, for example, go from Bicep or from JSON to Bicep, you can do az bicep decompile file main.json. There is going to probably be some conversion issues when you go from one way to the other. Oh, sorry, I think this one was from Bicep to creates a file named main.bicep. So this goes the other way, turning it into, and then we can go the other way as well down here as well. So it'll help you migrate from one way to the other. So if your organization is very invested in ARM, let them know they can always go back. It's not a closed door. If somebody, at the end of the day, when you use GitHub Actions, I'll show you too that we actually do deploy via the ARM template deployment step. So we can go ahead and it might sound scary for people if it's your first time using it, but it's really not, and you can kind of go from one way to the other.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah. So I'll pull this up. Let me see here. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Thanks, Siri. That's me. Pull up this now. So now what we'll walk through is, now that you know Bicep, I think the simplest thing always to do is to build a static site. So nothing crazy, just to, kind of get that up and running. Because the first thing I do when I learn a new technology is wanting to hit the ground running with it. So all of this is, and we'll go ahead and create some new files here, but this is just an Angular Tour of Heroes app, so it's nothing special. Think of just, if you go to ng create project, you're going to have your simple tour of heroes. This could be any of your, SPA static sites of choice. You could do this with React. You can do it with whatever. So you're going to kind of have two different things here. You'll have your Bicep file. So we're going to have our infrastructure as code file. And then we're also going to have our deployment file. So to start with, we'll go ahead and start with the infrastructure itself, like any good app. So we're going to host this on an Azure static site. And the best practice, let's just skip this because it'll tell us that when we get to it. So the first resource we're going to do is a static site. Web/static site. And the reason we're going to use this static site is because they are free up to, I believe it's a certain bandwidth or a certain amount of traffic. So if you're going to be doing, for example, my personal site is hosted on static sites, I think the first thing you pay for is blob storage, but you get enough of it for free that I've hosted it for, I think, 2 or 3 years now. Granted, I don't have a lot of content on there, but I haven't paid anything. So we'll give it a name. So it's going to tell us we need a name, location for those two. So we'll go ahead and give it name. Just make it static site. This will be the name that's used when it creates the resource in the Azure portal. And we'll give it a location. Let's say like West US. So what this is going to show us is a location shouldn't be hard-coded. It should actually be given a parameter. So we'll go ahead and do that. And what this is doing is it actually is going to give us a parameter of West US. The reason it's best practice to do that is so that you can pass it and override it. I think even better practice is usually to do resource group location. What that does is it says the resource group that we're going to try to deploy this in, just grab that location and pull it back. And this is something I wouldn't necessarily recommend for a production app, especially if your build runner is going to be publicly accessible. But for this example, it should be okay. And the reason we need this is because GitHub Actions actually will fail our build if we don't have this. Okay. And just to make sure I didn't typo that, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this over here. And what we're going to want is we're going to need the output, and we're going to call it deployment token equals static site it is with type string, and it's going to be with secrets. So if you've deployed to a static site before, you can actually push to that instance in Azure if you have the deployment token. And instead of hard coding this, we're going to do that. And we'll get the properties dot. It's not deployment token, it should be API key. And it's going to tell us that you shouldn't use that. Tell us we can just do that. So what this is going to do is it's going to build our static site and then output the deployment key when we get it put up. So what I'm going to do now is build our GitHub action. We'll just call it, for GitHub actions, it's typically best practice to do GitHub workflows, do it in here. So we'll do new pipeline.yaml. And so now that we have it, we now have a front-end app that is not deployed anywhere, is not built anywhere, and infrastructure that is also not deployed. So what we're going to do now is go to here, and the thing I suggest is going out, if you Google how to create a service connection with Microsoft, it'll walk you through setting some secrets behind the scenes so that you can connect to Azure to deploy your infrastructure as code. And we can name this whatever. So this is going to be our templating format for GitHub Actions. I know in the chat, I think we said JSON over YAML. Unfortunately, GitHub Actions is YAML based. So you'll be doing some YAML ops here for better or worse. We'll name it. So this can be whatever. This is what you want your pipeline to be named. So we'll do simple pipeline. What are we mad about? Oh, that's fine. We're just not there yet. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is tell our pipeline when it needs to act. So what we're going to do is say on. I usually do push. That's not quite what I wanted. If you're bad, you can just do it on main. So what this is going to do is every time we push to main, it's going to run this pipeline. And then we're also going to do pull requests, just in case we decide to do pull requests for branches main as well. One thing we are going to need to do is give it permissions. And give it the ID token. So this is how we're going to reference our token that we get from Azure. And then we're going to give contents and read. So this is allowing it to read our repo. All right, so now we have a pipeline that can see everything we need to see, doesn't know anything what to do yet. So we're going to first declare our first job. And we're going to call it build. And we'll just run on. This is where Copilot can be great, but sometimes not be what I want it to be. We're going to run it on Ubuntu latest and the steps. We do want to use GitHub Actions checkout. I don't know if there's like an except a single line. I don't want all that though. So what that's going to do is basically check out our code so that I can mess with all the files in the directories. After that, we're going to do, we can declare a name so we remember what this is. It's going to be log in via AZ module. And that is, I think that's what we want. Uses AZ login at v1 with that. Maybe not. Oh. Let's do this. Weird. Why isn't are we still mad? I think this is where YAML is great. Is it because of my indentation that we're upset? I think so, maybe. Oh, I was just too far indented. Yep, it was an indentation issue. That's why white space languages are great. All right, so now we've, at this point, logged into Azure. We have our code. Let's go ahead and build and deploy our app. We'll use the name. And this is going to use Azure static web apps deploy v1 with that's not what I wanted. And then this is where we're actually going to grab the token that we just output previously. So this is going to be the API token. Azure Static Web Apps API token. And it's going to use this to push to the static web app. And we'll find that by going back to steps. Oops, I totally forgot a step. So we don't have anything to reference right now. And what we're going to do is we actually need to deploy first so we can have an output to reference back to. So we'll do name run Bicep. And we're going to use Azure ARM deploy v1. And this is where you can kind of see, you know, Bicep at its core is still going to be ARM because you use the Azure ARM deploy to deploy your Bicep. With, we're going to first put it in ID, call it deploy, and we're going to say with credentials, and pass it our Azure credentials that we'll have previously set. Resource group name. In this specific case, I did set a resource group in the environment variables, but this could also just be whatever you name your resource group. So it could be ASDF, test group, just whatever you name it. Apparently somebody used that name, so Copilot is trained on it. And then template, it's going to be our template location. We just want template, not template location, which for us is simple.bicep, so it's at the root of our registry, or our repository, I mean, and it's just simple.bicep. And what do we, oh, use is next. That is a new one. Interesting. I haven't seen this before. What does it want via a scope? I don't think it's quite what I was looking for. Anyway, we can keep moving on.
Alec, quick question.
Yeah.
The pipeline you pull, you've got credentials that you're pulling from secrets there. That's not pulling from Key Vault, is it?
No, sorry, here, I can show you where that is. Let's go ahead. So this is just a public repo. Go to mine. So this is the repository that I'm working in right now. If we go to settings and go to secrets and variables for actions, you'll see I set some variables here. So this is the value it's pulling.
And is that private? Is that private to you?
Correct.
Okay. And then kind of a follow-up question, could I pull those secrets from Key Vault?
Yes, I believe you can. I think there's an action for it, but I'm just pulling this over here. Yeah, so there is a get Key Vault secrets action, I believe. Or you can, oh, just kidding. It's telling you to just use the Azure CLI. So you can just log in, use the Azure CLI like you would to read from a Key Vault. You can do Azure CLI Key Vault read, which is AZ Key Vault secret, I think. And then you can use that and then basically allow it to be, set it to a different secret or pass it into whatever needs it.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So those values are secret to whoever. I think it's also one of those that once you set it, you can't see it again. So these are specific to our repository. It can only be seen by people with certain levels, even be set by people with, I believe it's contributor access to the repository. Let's see what it wants with scope. Can do some debugging on the fly. I haven't seen that before. So if we Google this, you can actually see most of these GitHub actions are in packages that you can just look at hosted on GitHub. A lot of them typically have examples. We'll get some more information on it. I'm looking specifically on the static. That's weird. Because if we look, I'm not crazy. I don't see a scope here on either of these. I wonder if this is just like a false flag. Either that or the APIs or the documentation's also out of date. Anyway, I'm just gonna ignore this for right now because this did work and assume that this is maybe not correct, but we can come back to that. So now that we have our bicep here, we can go ahead and reference it further on in a later job. So this is how you could declare a secret potentially through the CLI. I'm going to go ahead and reference the steps. So this is, we're basically pointing back at this array. I'm going to do dot deploy, which is the ID that we set here. And I'm going to do dot outputs dot, and we called it deployment token. So what that's doing is basically I'm stepping back here, stepping into this job, going over to here and grabbing deployment token. And pasting it. So that will then pass that in when we do the web apps API token. The other parameters we need are, we don't need the repo token. Sorry, we do. So what this is doing is it's going to allow us to read from the repo. We're going to have our action, which will be upload. We need the app location. So this is where in your repository your app is located. So for us, it is in /angular -tour -of -heroes. So this is essentially where you want it to run your NPM build. And then if you worked with Angular before, the artifact location by default, because this is the Angular Tour of Heroes app, it's going to be dist Angular Tour of Heroes. And then it's best practice to run an easy log out. The way GitHub disposes of its build runners, you shouldn't have to do this. It's just considered best practice. So if your organization has like shared build runners, somebody can't basically hop in and hijack your Azure session. So bring it all back together. Whenever we push to code or a pull request, we want to do this. You can do if type. So if you want to run, for example, tests only on PRs, you can do that. Pull requests, if you want to only run certain deployments, for example, on merges to main, you can do that. You can set that up however you want, but in this case, on either action, we're going to go ahead and do the full thing. And at the end of the day, we should have something in Azure. You can run this through the CLI locally, assuming that these credentials aren't. Let's see if I can. And on the other screen over here, I'm doing an interactive login. And I'm going to create a resource group real quick. And we're going to try to run this locally. So let's see if we can get the Bicep. So if you want to test your Bicep template before deploying it, we can run, and we can do it in a deployment group. Or you can just do AZ deploy. Sorry, I'm trying to read into this on the fly. Create. Do this. And we'll see I have a new version of Bicep available. Oh, oops. It helped if I passed it in the right resource group. And I named it. Resource groups. And it looks like my location East US is not available. So we'll go ahead and I'll do this. So I created my resource group in East US. It looks like they're not allowing static sites to be created in East US. Resource name is missing. What? We can go ahead and pull this over here. Should have a failed deployment here then, I think. I do not. Weird. Anyway, that's really strange. Let me see if I can steal this file over here. I have a pre-canned one that is not. So if we go here, this is the same example. Oh, I might be missing the skew and this. If that doesn't work, I'm not really sure what's going on. Anyway, so while that's running, if you want to check this out, this is an example of it running. We have the workflows, we have the pipeline. One piece that is commented out, if you do want to do CI/CD, the way this is working with the static site, you do have to run this command here to disconnect the static site. Otherwise, it'll kind of hold it hostage and not let somebody take it down by mistake. So you do have to run the disconnect command. So if you just throw that in, it'll log into Azure, disconnect, and then go again. But let's see, it did deploy. So let's go ahead and go back to the portal. bright white light. And we should have a static app here. And there won't be anything added until we go to, I should just say, yeah, the site sitting here. And then we can run the static app. We can either deploy it through the CLI locally, or we can run our GitHub action, and then the Angular Tour of Heroes app will be there. One thing that's really cool about static sites is you do get free HTTPS certs right off the bat. So if you're trying to host an API cheaply, or if you want to host a website that you don't really care about the domain name, you can do that. But yeah, is there any other questions? I think, let me go back to the PowerPoint here. I think that's all I had.
Does anyone have any questions for Alec? And if not, I have a question for you, actually.
Yeah.
So, can you build in contingencies in the deployment? For example, if you want to check for a certain value, and if it doesn't match, to roll back the deployment?
Yeah, like a health check kind of thing, or something similar.
To that, yeah.
Yeah, so you can actually do a lot of these steps do have outputs, and you can say if this is not met, fail. So you can define what a failure case is depending on the step, and then you can also put in specifically, I believe, continue on failure, proceed on failure. So if you have potentially different logic in there, you can kind of go branching logic. You can say, I don't care if any previous steps, for example, like error logging. Maybe I always want the container to dump out something, even if the deployment fails. Let me see if I can find that. The one thing that is pretty cool about GitHub Actions and that we didn't talk about with static sites is static sites also support a concept called environments. So you can actually deploy to a separate fully hosted environment. And that's one difference between going from a free one to a paid one, is you can have multiple environments going on here. So you can check at a pull request level and go out and check your app of what's going on there. And then it looks like you can also do health checks here. So you can do this, retry delays, or different values, right? You can do any sort of bash or whatnot and roll back, either putting back what you have, or if you use a separate environment, you can just deploy it, know that environment's bad, and then eventually it'll be replaced the next time you go.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions for Alec or comments? All right. Well, Alec, thank you very much for a great presentation. Definitely appreciate your time. And I just have a couple concluding slides before we wrap it up for the night. So if I may, I'd like to share my screen.
Yep, go for it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right. So if you take a look over on your chat window, you'll see that there is several links that are posted, and we'll go through those in just a little bit. So first and foremost, the recording of the presentation will be edited and uploaded. And if you would please subscribe to the channel to get upload notifications. Likewise, the tech events are posted on my blog. And if you would please subscribe to that to get updates as well. And last but not least, the feedback eval form. The link for that is posted in the chat. Please take a few minutes to fill that out, and so we can provide Alec with some constructive criticism. We don't want just his wife to hassle him on the presentation. We want to help him out as well. In addition, for those that joined us after the start of the meeting, a 35% off offer on Manning.com for a selection of books. The link as well as the discount code for that is available in the chat window. And one of the things that we always like to do is discuss job openings. So you can find job openings at techsystems.com/IT-jobs, but we always like to ask who's hiring and who's looking for work. So if anyone knows of any job openings, if you would please post it in the chat window or come off of mute and make yourself known verbally. And so far, I see nothing at this time. However, if you were to come across any openings or if you're looking for something, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is snasser@nistechnologies.com. And you can always find me on Twitter @SamNasser. The link to my blog, once again, samnasser.blogspot.com. And if we're not connected on LinkedIn, I invite you to do so.
Can I plug something? Can I plug something real quick?
Please.
Okay, yeah. Monday night is going to be the Memphis Python user group that I also run, but it's not going to be a technical talk. It's actually going to be it's not going to be Python. It's actually going to be, we're going to be discussing since it's just a week before Christmas, thought I'd do something a little more casual. We'll be discussing Microsoft for Startup Founders Hub. So anybody who's got an idea, for a startup out there, really, I mean, they let almost anybody in at first, and then all you have to have is an idea to get started with this, and they'll help you grow and scale your startup with resources up to $150,000 eventually in Azure credits even. So there's a really good opportunity if you can indulge me just a second while I find the link to the meetup here.
Sure, absolutely.
I will say I am also on Founders Hub as an expert. I think if you want any help, or I think it's an hour or two session. If you have any Azure related questions, out of my focus area.
Yeah, actually, Alec, if you want to show up Monday night and tell us about some more and tell us about what you're doing at Founders Hub, I'll definitely. I just put the link in the chat there. Definitely. Would like to have you there as well. In fact, Sam, I think I saw you signed up for that. I think I saw you on the RSVP for that, but or maybe I was mistaken. But I think I saw you on the RSVP. So
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. But at any rate, that's coming up. So like I said, even though it's the Python user group, it's not. It's going to be. It's going to be something. It's not even a technical talk. It's open to something of interest to everybody.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes,
And the link is posted in the chat. Yes, Rick.
So regarding jobs, I think I've posted this before, but Meyer has always ongoing open positions in their IT area, and I think there's probably about 11 or 12 open right now. And Meyer, for the most part, unless you're in management, allows you to work remotely within the 6-state territories. So Ohio certainly being in that territory. So if you're looking for something, certainly check jobs.meyer.com, and then you probably want to put your location as Grand Rapids because that's where our headquarters are. But then from there, you can search for IT type positions or other positions too.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else with job openings or questions or comments in general? All right. Once again, you have my contact information, so if anything was to come up later, feel free to email me or connect on LinkedIn. So with that, thanks again to Alec for taking the time to present a very informative presentation. And thank you all for attending. Have a great holiday, and I look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Good night, everyone.
Thanks.